Hey, it's Casey.
And Lauren.
And this is...
Magnum B.I, the investigative podcast where we dive deep into a new topic each week.
Per usual, we're going to add a little bit of comedy, a little bit of banter, and...
Casey, why don't you take a seat?
Well, if you're wondering, we're going to be talking about To Catch a Predator this week.
And we have a special guest joining us this time. Give it up for Chris Hansen, everybody!
Why don't you take a seat?
Yeah.
Just take a seat over there at the counter. Take your hands out of your pockets.
Is it true? Did you bring condoms to this meeting?
Why don't you pull them out of your pocket?
Why don't you pull them out of your pocket?
If you don't know, and I'll get into this, I have a crazy, outrageous, outlandish obsession with To Catch a Predator for the past year, and I still don't really know why. I was kind of like, when I write the script, it'll enlighten why I'm so obsessed with To Catch a Predator. Still confused. Have maybe a slighter better idea. But yeah, I'm excited to really dive into it this week.
I know, I can't wait. I feel like we discussed the To Catch a Predator concept way back at the 4th or 5th episode of season 1. And you just mentioned that you've been obsessed with this for such a long time.
It never stopped.
And it never stopped.
No.
And that's been almost a year at this point.
Yeah, and the thing with it is it's not a lot of things that you can be obsessed with where there's an unlimited amount of content or they're making new content actively. It's done.
Yeah.
And I've just watched every episode 20 times each.
Really?
Because there's not even that much of it. We'll get into it. But before we get started, I had a story to tell you.
I'm excited.
That I haven't told Lauren yet. Yesterday, so I have an internship as part of my grad program. And I work on a college campus, helping students in the dorms, residents.
And in the sex lab.
That one I'm much more passionate about. But I was tabling for the dorm job. And me and one of my coworkers, Claudia, who you know.
Yes.
We were doing a safe sex Jeopardy event.
Slay.
At a table. So it was people who walked by, if they answered a Jeopardy question about safe sex, they would win condoms and candy.
Oh, nice. And
the first guy who walked up to our table, frat guy, I'm assuming, the question was what female sex organ is only designed for pleasure?
Oh, no.
So obviously the answer is the clitoris, right?
Yeah, obviously.
He looks at it. This is so true. And he was not joking. He looks at it and he goes, I don't know, the mouth.
Oh!
And me and Claudia, we looked at the question, and we looked at him, and we looked at the question, and we were like, no. And he was like, what? I misread it. I don't know, the clit? And it's you didn't misread that.
You did not.
That was a Freudian slip.
That was, oh my God. If you said to this man, so no head, he would kill you.
Yeah.
Fuck, dude.
I was like, oh my God.
I think I would have been horrified. I don't know what my face would have done in that moment, but it would not have been PC.
No.
It would not have been pretty.
It was wild. It was, yeah. Anyway.
God.
But what a great transition. So this week, we're going to be talking about To Catch a Predator.
Let's go fucking get one.
Let's go fucking get it.
Yeah.
Okay, technical difficulties is an understatement for what tonight has been. We'll get into it at the end of the episode.
I have so much trauma to unload by the end of this.
Lauren, I'm not doing well.
I am not okay.
And I have to do research when I get home after this. It's 8 o'clock at night.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well,
anyway.
Let's catch some predators.
Let's catch a predator or two, shall we?
Let's go.
All right, so... As I said in the beginning, I'm deeply obsessed with To Catch a Predator.
Yes.
Have been for about a year.
Yes.
You wouldn't think of it as somebody's comfort show.
Yeah.
It's very much my comfort show. It's that show that, when I, had a lot going on that day, I don't want to think too much, I don't want to learn anything new, I put it on. And it's just, very relaxing for me. I don't know why. I'm not saying that's a good quality on my part, but that's simply my truth.
Do you want to know what mine is?
What?
Kitchen Nightmares. Which is very similar energy. It's just a lot of yelling. Something bad is going on. But in the end, good things happen.
Yeah. Well, good things don't happen. I mean, depends
Usually
on your perspective. They do be catching predators.
Period.
Okay, so trigger warning before we get into this episode. If you know anything about this show, you'll know there are going to, throughout this episode, be heavy themes of child sex abuse, grooming, and a brief mention of suicide.
Oh, okay.
So if those are things that you don't want to hear about, that's pretty much all we're going to be talking about. So feel free to click away.
We're really bringing it back to season 1.
Yeah, right. This is Eileen part 2.
Yeah, literally.
Also, I want to say just a couple things. I'm going to add some like nuance to the discussion around this show. But I am by no means excusing any of these men or like child abusers in general. I think that should go without saying.
Yeah.
But I just want to make that very clear up front. The men caught on the show were inherently planning on doing fucked up things. Mm-hmm. I just think it's kind of worth having a conversation about different forms of justice, what the best form of justice is in different cases, etc. Mm-hmm. And one last thing. A lot of this is very comical. Like, some of the things that the host of the show says to the men is very funny. Some of it is just, like, absurd. So it's really easy to laugh at this show. But it's also really important to remember that these men were going to be sexually assaulting children if it wasn't a sting operation.
Yeah.
So levity, I think, is fine to a certain extent. But, like, I'm also not trying to overlook, like, the reality of what's going on in the world every day.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good disclaimer. Casey says no to sex predators.
That's my campaign for Say Senate.
The way we literally got a phone call about early voting earlier today.
I saw, like, spam risk on my phone when we were walking in to do this episode, and I opened it thinking it was going to be like, your car warranty is expired.
Yeah.
And it was a genuine woman being like, are you voting?
And I just walked away because I was like, shit.
I had a 3-minute conversation with her.
Casey wants to know his nearest polling location, which is good information to know.
I will be voting on Saturday.
Yay!
Okay. We begin in 2004.
With Sit Our Scene.
Picture it.
In the deep, dark recesses of MySpace. Circa 2004.
The beginning of Romeo and Juliet.
The beginning of the end, as it were.
So, for context, in 2004, AIM, which your rat is like drinking.
He's thirsty.
He's like thirsty. Okay.
Unofficial mascot of the pod.
For context, AIM, which was like AOL's instant messenger, began in 1997.
Oh, okay.
So, like, at this point, 2004, we're still in a very new age of online chat. Mm-hmm. So the rules and etiquette and decorum of, like, chat rooms are still kind of being established. And we're in a world where not everyone owns a webcam, mm-hmm. and social media still is, like, not really a thing.
Yeah.
So it's much easier to lie about who you are.
Age, sex, location, baby.
ASL, babes.
ASL.
And they use that on the show all the time.
Yes.
And also teenagers then and today are able to chat with strangers in a way that they've never been able to do before, mm-hmm. in the privacy of their own home.
Yep.
So it's not like a creepy man approaching young children on the corner of the street or on the playground. It's like kids in their home where parents think that they're safe, mm-hmm. being groomed.
Yep. And it's completely uncharted territory because there has never been anything happening like this up until this point.
Yep. And I mean, it still exists today, just like more covertly and like differently, but you know, this was the Wild Wild West in a lot of ways.
Did you ever do internet safety, like, assemblies when you were younger?
Actually, no.
Are you serious?
No, we should have.
For whatever reason, my elementary school, well, not for whatever reason, they were obsessed with, like, the whole, the internet is unsafe, people are gonna lie to you, blah, blah, blah. And I still went out and found the deepest, darkest recesses of the internet. Mm-hmm. Not because I was a depraved child, but because I was curious.
Yeah, you're curious. I mean, it makes sense. Like,
mm-hmm.
teenagers will always test the limits, mm-hmm. see how far they can go. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a natural part of growing up and of learning how the world works. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just, like, dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
and I think a rotten little part of my rat brain, as soon as it hears, you can't do X, Y, or Z, I'm gonna fucking do it.
Yeah, of course.
Any teenager knows that feeling.
Yes.
It's like, fuck you, I'm gonna see what the dark web is about.
Yes, especially, like, in this case, when you're, like, horny and you want to experiment with sex for the first time, you're learning about sex for the first time, there's someone showing you attention, like, of course, you know?
We love attention here on this pod.
Yep. Don't we ever?
Yes, we do.
So this led to a number of very high-profile cases in which in real-life cases, in which young teenagers would meet with older men that they'd met online, and then they were subsequently raped or murdered.
Jeez.
And or murdered. So I wouldn't call it like a panic, but around this time, internet-induced sex crimes kind of sparked like this really big, widespread fear through the U.S. because older people with children didn't understand the internet, and their children who grew up with it understood the internet in a way that they like couldn't even begin to comprehend. So it was kind of a really bad situation in a lot of ways. On the first episode of To Catch a Predator, they did like a focus group with a bunch of parents and asked them like, do you think your kid is unsafe online? Like, what do you think your kid's doing online? And one of the parents, the mothers, said, quote, "Their social naivete coupled with our digital naivete is a dangerous thing."
Ooh.
Which is true.
Yeah.
Which is very, very true.
Yeah, that's a hot take.
So in 2004, Dateline NBC, which was is a nighttime news magazine program, released the first episode of a show they called Dangerous Web.
Ooh.
So it was an hour-long segment in which the reporter, Chris Hansen, went undercover to catch men who were trying to groom children on the internet. Chris Hansen was an NBC reporter who had made a name for himself in the years leading up to Catch a Predator. For NBC, he covered the Columbine shooting, the Oklahoma City bombings, the Unabomber, and the September 11 attacks.
Holy shit.
So he was like getting up in the investigative journalism world.
I was going to say, I mean, I kind of always assumed, based on like the overall scuzziness of the concept of this show, that they would have just, and no disrespect to Chris, but they would just have like some guy, you know, not somebody that's covering bombings and shootings and 9/11. Yeah, so he's like an accredited journalist.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, my next point is today, however, he's best known for To Catch a Predator. Is like, this is something that was meant to be like a 1 or 2 off thing, just like an investigative piece one night, and it ended up being a phenomenon. Yeah. He just like capitalized off of it.
That's insane. He's literally like the Mr. Rogers of sex crimes. Everyone knows.
Could say.
Yeah, kind of. Everyone knows Chris Hansen.
Yeah. He just like, it really just became his MO. To this day, he's still working in that world.
Good for him. Oh, wait. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because he's involved with the Onision scandal.
Yes. Yeah.
I forgot about that until just
that's
now.
That's his like current project. Yeah.
Oh, I should do an episode on that.
I have a lot of opinions, but this episode's already going to be long, so I'm not going to. So this is kind of how To Catch a Predator, which became the name of this show, worked. So Chris Hansen worked with an online watchdog group called Perverted Justice.
Oh, slay.
So Perverted Justice was made up of a team of volunteers who would go into chat rooms and pretend to be a child, usually ranging from the ages of 11 to 14.
Oof.
13, 14 was usually the most common, but they would do 11 and 12 years old sometimes. So Perverted Justice had been doing this long before Chris Hansen and To Catch a Predator got involved.
Oh, wow.
They would go into these chat rooms, they would get these men to engage with the quote-unquote children who they were posing to be, and then they would post these men's photos to their website.
Ooh.
So they would be like, this person with this name who sent me this photo just had an online conversation with someone that they thought was 13. This is their photo, this is their name, this is where they work, and this is the conversation that they just had.
That is so fucking cool. So they were a group of like little vigilantes.
Yes, it was very vigilante. It was very like share your story. It was very like justice, but like not through like the legal system. It was like an outing, Robin Hood. Yeah.
I love that. That's so awesome.
Yep. And it worked for them for a long time, and that's when To Catch a Predator was like, hey, these people are doing this really cool thing, we should make a show out of it. And they involved them in it.
That's actually really cool.
It was really, and Perverted Justice plays a really big part in the show. They like are the main people who run these operations, and then Chris Hansen just kind of does like the confrontation, which I'll get into.
That's so insane. That's like surprisingly ethical. Like usually they just steal the idea and then say fuck you.
Yes, that's very ethical, and also like them involving Perverted Justice is very ethical. And I would argue that the act of like outing someone in that way, to like keep a community safe and tell people not to let these people around your children and everything is more ethical than like immediately involving the police.
Absolutely.
But we'll get into that.
Yeah.
Because that didn't last forever.
Well, that's fair. Because, yeah, like predators don't deserve any kind of anonymity.
No.
They should be on a fucking billboard.
Yes.
Fuck those guys.
No, I agree with you. Especially when they are like actively making plans to meet up with the kids.
Like that is evil. Yes. Demonstrably evil.
Yes, and I am in no way arguing against that. Just want to make that clear. So then Perverted Justice would go on. They would usually pose as a young girl. Sometimes they would be a young boy. To the profile, they would post a picture of a person that was unmistakably a young child.
Yeah.
And then they would wait. Usually within minutes of creating this profile and entering a chat room, often chat rooms that were meant for kids or teenagers, men would begin approaching them. Ugh. So they would never make the first move. They would never make the first flirty comment. They always waited for men to come to them, and men always did.
Really?
Always.
Ugh.
Quickly. Ugh. And then they would, in the conversation, very early on, make it very clear that they were 11 or 12 or 13. And the men would typically react with some variation of, like, that's so hot.
Ew.
Yep.
Ew.
Yeah.
Don't you think that any sane person upon hearing that would be like, that's cool, goodbye?
Well, I think To Catch a Predator did a lot, though, to if a man had an inclination to think that's hot, after To Catch a Predator, men who would have engaged with this were like, I'm scared.
They set this precedent?
Yeah.
Wow.
Very much.
I mean, I guess that makes sense.
Because obviously if you're not a person who's attracted to a 13-year-old, you would be like, ew, bye.
Yeah.
But if you are, before To Catch a Predator, you very likely would have engaged in the conversation because you thought it was a safe space. Mm-hmm. And To Catch a Predator made people realize that the internet was being patrolled in this way.
Have I ever showed you that graph that makes me upset every time I think about it?
No.
It's a graph of women and men and the age of the person of the opposite sex that they think is most attractive. Oh. And it's on an axis where their ages are offset with the age of the person that they're attracted to, right? So the graph of the women follows a linear line. So as the woman gets older, the person that she thinks is attractive also gets older along with her. With men, it stays at the lowest end of the axis.
Oh, Jesus.
And it probably would have gone lower had the minimum age not been 20.
No.
Mm-hmm.
So it stays like a long 20?
It stays 20.
Ew.
From the age of 20 to the age of 30 to the age of 60 to the age of 80. 20. And that is only because they couldn't have gone lower.
That is fucking wild.
And I'll have to see if I can find the graph and link it in our link tree because it's from a study. I've like looked this up before because I was like, this has to be some kind of like clickbait on the internet to make feminists angry.
Yeah.
But it's real. It's from like a 2013 study done by the University of Michigan or some shit like that. So that just made me think of that.
Well, there's just like such a conversation to have there about what anthropologically makes men more attracted to young women and young women more attracted to older men. But like at the same time, like that does not excuse socially at all, period whatsoever, excuse a man being attracted to someone under 20.
and whether or not there is like a sociological or an anthropological perspective in that case, we're not fucking cavemen anymore.
No.
We should have evolved past that point regardless. But I do see your point there.
Ew. Yeah. You have to show me that.
Much to consider.
That's going to make me angry.
Yep. It makes me angry.
So the decoys on the internet would then say that their parents were out of town. And then they would arrange for a time for the man to come over to their house. When arranging a time to come over, the men would show up at the decoy's house. The team would rent this like inconspicuous suburban home and wire it with hidden cameras and microphones.
Ooh.
A young sounding voice would invite them in and ask them to sit at the kitchen counter. So the young voice always said like, hey, come on in, sit at the kitchen counter for a sec, okay? Or, I'm just picking out a jacket for our bike ride, take a seat. Or a really like common yet bizarre one that the decoy would use was like, they would say like, hey man, sit down to the counter for a second. I whacked my toe on the banister. I gotta get a Band-Aid.
I whacked my toe on the banister,
They'd be like,
dude.
my mom's gonna kill me if I bleed on the rug.
I gotta get a Snoopy Band-Aid because I am 12 years old. Be right down, dog.
They would say that like all the time, and I don't like know why, because it clearly didn't work. Because they would say that, and then the men would be like, okay. Like, either they'd like start to like retreat from the home, or they would be like, all right. Like,
how many banisters are there? What is happening in the 90s?
If you're wagging your toe that often, we should talk about strategies to like walk slower.
we should do some restorative toad whacking and undo it.
Yeah, I don't know why they use that one so
Yeah,
often.
that's awesome.
So they would invite them in. In later episodes, the To Catch a Predator team started hiring like 19-year-old drama students to play the decoy.
Oh.
So instead of there just being like a disembodied voice from the other room that was inviting them in, like a young-looking person would show up at the door and invite them in.
Oh, no.
So then it made them feel like they show up, they see this person who looks like the child that they'd been talking to online, and they feel more comfortable, and they come in.
Ugh.
One of these decoys is hilarious because he... I'll show you a picture after this. He looks like a 30-year-old man with a receding hairline. And the men show up and he's like, hi, I'm just a 13-year-old looking to experiment.
I'm 10 years old!
And he's like balding.
Did you ever know any kids in middle school that started to go bald?
No.
Because there was one in particular from mine that I remember very particularly, and I'm not going to say his name, but he was a football player, and he was a hockey player, and I used to think he was so cute. I love a hockey player, but by the time we were seniors in high school, it was like beyond his temples, and I don't know what karmic justice he was experiencing, but it was fucking foul.
It's sad.
It
It's
is.
really, I'm like, I really think that I'm not going to go bald. Because both sides of my family have a lot of hair.
Good.
But, like, when you're that young, it was tragic.
Yeah, it was bad. And he used to be so cute. And then I was like, oh.
It's so sad.
You're 18. That's bad.
So the men, with varying levels of hesitance, usually less hesitant in the earlier episodes than they were in the later episodes, but they would come inside, they would sit at the counter, and they would wait for the kid to come out and meet them.
Right.
Once the men sat down, they would sometimes help themselves to a plate of cookies that were left on the counter, or they would strike up a conversation with the decoy in the other room, or they would kind of like look around the house and make comments about it. Then, after a minute, Chris Hansen would appear from the other room, wearing a blazer, holding a manila envelope, and say, why don't you take a seat?
And we're back again.
Full circle.
Yep.
And in these moments, Chris had some like real fucking zingers. I wrote a few of them down.
Okay.
He walks out. He says, I guess I'm probably not the surprise you expected, am I? Or, so I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
Oh, classic.
Or, did you have a hard time finding the place? Or, my favorite one, and one that he like clearly enjoyed dropping, the man went to give the decoy a hug, and clearly the decoys are told not to touch the men, because like every time the men go to make any sort of physical advance on the decoys, the actors like just run to the other room.
Right.
The man went to hug the decoy, and Chris comes out and he goes, what? No hug for me? So you can tell he was like eating it up.
I would be eating it up. Like,
Yeah.
that is an awesome job to have, to be like, hey, you fuck.
Yeah, like, what the fuck are you, dog?
Yeah, what are you doing?
And it's so funny because the men, they always begin to panic. So there's always this like really like super visceral, visible, the color drains out of their face, they begin shaking, it's really obvious. A lot of the times, most of the times, they think that Chris is either a cop or they think that he's, like, the child's dad.
Yeah. Yep.
And they start just, like, panicking.
Oh, yeah. And because, I mean, he's a white guy.
And, yeah, he's a tall white guy who, like, was wearing a blazer. He's very composed. Like, yeah.
He was expecting them.
Yes. One of the really good things that To Catch a Predator did, I think, was they moved around the country to do different stings. So, not including the spin-offs, these are in order, all of the stings that they did.
Okay.
Bethpage, Long Island, New York was the first one.
Damn.
Fucking Long Island.
Hate to see it.
Fairfax, Virginia. Riverside, California. A small town in Ohio. Fort Myers, Florida. Fortson, Georgia, which is on the Alabama border. Petaluma, California, Long Beach, California, Murphy, Texas, which was the most infamous and deadly story
Are we going to talk
to
about
follow.
that?
Yeah.
Oh!
Flagler Beach, Ocean County, New Jersey, and Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Dang.
So they really did like big town, small town, wealthy town, poor town. And they did a good job like adapting to the cultures of the different areas. So like in Fortson, Georgia, for instance, they offered the they offered the men who came in sweet tea.
Oh.
So they just like did a good job kind of like adjusting. And like in the small town Ohio sting, they were in a very small, lower middle class house. In the Petaluma, California, they were in like a mansion.
Nice.
So they did a good job kind of keeping the men off their tracks.
Good.
And shaking it up.
Good.
Yeah.
Because if it was like entirely localized to say like a specific suburb in New York City.
Yes.
Like all the predators would be like, I'm just gonna go a street over.
They would travel because these men already travel.
Oh,
these
yeah.
men drive like hundreds of miles to come meet this fucking teenage girl.
For
They will
real?
drive like 3 hours
That's
to come
foul.
meet this teenage girl.
Oh.
So if they stayed like within New York, like if they only stayed in like the tri-state area, these men would be driving to like fucking Western Pennsylvania.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah. So I'm glad that they did that.
Wow.
It's hard to understand just how many men, I have chills, just how many men showed interest in these children on the internet, let alone how many actually took the move to show up to the house. The team who produced this show was often double booked, and they had to be strategic in how they got the men in and out of the house without seeing each other.
Huh.
For instance, in Riverside, California, I want you to guess. They were there for probably like 48 hours. I want you to guess how many men not only talked to a minor online, but showed up at the house with intentions to have sex with a minor.
In California?
In Riverside, California, which is like Southern California.
I'm thinking Hollywood scandal.
48 hours.
I want 48 hours. I'm gonna go big. I'm gonna say 20.
51. 51 in a 48-hour span, give or take. 51 men. And that's again, not including the people who just talked to the kid online but then never showed up. 51 men walked into that house.
No, not 51.
51 men.
Oh,
Isn't
ew.
that foul?
That actually makes me feel ill.
I have like shivers. So after the men sat down on the counter, Chris began interrogating them. So they sit down, he stands over them, he's holding the case files, and he usually asks them to take their hands out of their pockets. So I've compiled a list of the most common excuses that these men give for why they were there to meet an 11, 12, or 13-year-old.
Okay.
Now, these are not mutually exclusive. They often give one of these excuses, and then their story changes, or they kind of give two at once, or whatever.
Right.
This is also in no particular order. But the first one is the most common, and is pretty much universal. They weren't going to do anything.
Right.
So this is standard across all the predators. Of all of the hundreds of men who were caught in To Catch a Predator, I can think of like 3 or 4 who were totally forthright about their intentions of being there.
Wow.
Literally everyone else insists that they were only there to talk to the kid and they had no sexual plans. That is like the most common excuse and pretty much a universal excuse.
Who the fuck is gonna believe that? Like, respectfully, what brain dead idiot is gonna be like, oh, so you just drove like 300 miles to have a chat?
And then Chris always says that too. If the guy's like 30 and he's like, oh, I just want to make a friend, Chris was like, there are no 30-year-olds you can hang out with. Like, he always called them out on that.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Oh, let's go, Chris.
The second excuse, they didn't know that it was a kid.
Okay.
So they say that they came to the house to meet this person. They met this person online. They might have had sex with this person, but they didn't know it was a minor. Or they thought that the kid was 18, 19, or 45. Like, they claimed that the kid told them a different age. So this is an example of this. Michael Willis, I think, who was a 45-year-old caught in the Fort Myers, Florida investigation, who had the screen name generic white male.
Great.
So
Great.
Chris tells this man that the girl he was there to meet and the girl who he sent pictures of his penis to was 15.
Right.
And the man, while eating a cookie, says in the least convincing voice ever, "What? No way." Just like that.
What?
Flat face did not move.
Wow, great.
He then proceeds to throw the cookie onto the table and say, "You know what? I don't want this cookie. I just want to get to the beach."
No.
So they always just like pretend that they didn't know that it was a 14-year-old, even though clearly within 2 messages the kid says, "I'm 14."
Oh my god. And I'm sure, like, in his little manila folder, he has everything itemized.
He says, "Well, I have the transcript."
Exactly.
He always says that.
He's like, let's take a look-see at your AOL instant messages where the creep is like, oh, 15 is so hot.
Yeah.
You're so mature for your age.
"I want to, like, eat your young pussy."
Not that!
They
Not
always
that!
say that
No,
one.
dude!
So, another reason. The person online, the child, said that they were a minor, but we were in a role-playing chat room.
What?
So, an example of this was David Schumacher, who was a 21-year-old man who was caught also in Fort Myers.
Not that.
David was a white man, objectively. His last name is Schumacher, but he walks with, like, his pants sagged down. He has a flat-brimmed snapback. He keeps saying, like, dog and, like, you feel me? Like, he just thinks he's very, like,
he thinks he's all that.
Yeah. So Chris says to him, "Do you see an issue with a 21-year-old coming over to visit a 14-year-old home alone?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And David says, "I didn't know she was 14. And Chris says, "She told you." And David says, "We were in a role-playing chat room." Meanwhile, this chat room was not role-playing.
Yeah.
In fact, it was called Florida Romance.
Ew. Ew.
Yeah.
So gross.
Another common excuse is that the house was for sale and that they were in the market for buying a house.
Interesting leap in logic there.
Well, you would think that it would be like one person who used that excuse. There's been a few.
Really?
So one example is a man named Aladdin Shaman, who was a middle-aged Egyptian man who went to the house to meet a 12-year-old girl. 12.
12. You know what I was doing when I was 12 years old? I was wearing Bobby Jack shirts. I was playing on Animal Jam.
I had fucking silly mans,
Yeah,
bro.
I was a child.
That makes me so sad. If you think about if that happened to you when you were 12, like, oh.
I can't even begin to tell you the psychological damage it would have done to me.
No, are you kidding?
I would, like, be a serial killer, I
would
think.
never be the same.
No.
I know. So Chris comes out, he sees Aladdin, and before anything, Aladdin shakes Chris's hand, and he says, "Thank you, sir. Nice seeing you. How are you, sir?" And Chris is like, "Oh, I'm fine."
Oh my god!
Chris asks what he was doing there, and Aladdin says, "Just hanging around. I know that this house is for sale."
Whoa.
And again, he's not the only one. Another man, also a middle-aged Egyptian man, coincidentally, named Mohammed Abdallah, who was caught in Flagler Beach, Florida, says that he was driving around looking for real estate. Chris says, "So you just happened to be going by and you saw this blonde woman out there and she waved you in. What an amazing coincidence. You're a lucky guy. You're just driving along and this good-looking girl waves you in." And he's like, "Yeah, I was here to buy the house."
What the fuck?
Like, what?
So
why
crazy.
is that where your mind goes?
I know. I'm trying to think, like, God forbid I ever have to, like, lie to somebody like that. I'm not going to be like, I'd like to purchase this home.
Like, why is that the first... Yeah.
I don't know.
Another excuse is that they were there to mentor the kid.
Oh, no. That's even creepier.
So a man named Stanley Kendall, who was a 54-year-old man caught in Murphy, Texas.
Wishful thinking, maybe.
Let's guess what the 54-year-old man named Stanley, who was caught in Murphy, Texas, does for a living.
A daycare worker.
A middle school math teacher.
Oh, ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
Child predator.
And he was there to meet a what? A 13-year-old boy.
A 13-year-old boy.
Yeah, he'd been working as a middle school math teacher for 23 years when he showed up to the house to meet a 13-year-old boy.
I think that is every parent's worst nightmare.
Oh, and he looks like...
Does he have the mustache and the glasses?
Yeah, the glasses.
Of course,
It's dangerous to say that a pedophile looks a certain way because obviously they don't, whatever, that's misleading, but like that's like archetype pedophile. Mm-hmm. When he gets there and Chris, like, calls him out, he says, probably, I was thinking the part of me that's Christian was going to talk him out of it. And Chris says, so what part of the Bible tells you to say all of this stuff here in the chat? I love to suck cock. Play and suck balls. Play with and lick nipples. Lick and fuck ass. Where is that in the Bible? Explain that to me. Is that Old Testament or New Testament? Chris Hansen!
You fucking legend! That is incredible.
And Stanley Kendall just says, neither.
Neither. That's in the revised version.
Yeah.
That's in the one online.
That's King James.
That's King James.
Another man whose name, I'm sorry, I simply can't pronounce, but he was a 34-year-old Indian director of software development for a very large computer company, was caught in Fortson, Georgia, trying to meet a 13-year-old. He's very good looking, he's married, he has a high-paying job and an MBA, and he tells Chris that he was just there to make sure the 13-year-old girl was focusing on her studies.
Why is that also another go-to?
Yep.
I don't like that.
Another excuse is that they showed up to the wrong house. They were there for a different reason. For instance, one man named Thomas Coffin, who was there to meet a 14-year-old girl, said that he was there to find a job doing blacktop sealing.
At night?
At night. With a child.
With a child. Yeah, I really need something sealed.
When I was 13, I loved inviting men over to talk about sealing my parents' blacktop. That's like how I spent my time.
It's like, yeah, look at the holes in the driveway.
I gotta get someone over here.
Mom's
not doing it quick enough. I'm gonna help out.
Yep.
And the least common excuse, the very rare exception, is when they tell the truth right away.
Yeah.
So, for instance, a 43-year-old man in Riverside named Walter Babst, who was there to meet a 12-year-old girl. He was a high school teacher also. He was also charming and attractive. He mentioned in the transcript that he wanted the 12-year-old to make him eat his own semen.
Whoa.
As soon as Chris walks out, Walter says, am I under arrest? Go ahead, arrest me. I knew it. I knew it was a setup. I need you to just arrest me and take me to jail. I'm a sick son of a bitch.
Oh my God. Oh no.
Another man named Vincent Ambrosio was another 20-something caught in Fairfield, Connecticut. He was another one who just admitted it right away. He's dubbed the Undertaker Predator online because he showed up to the Sting house wearing a wide-brimmed black cap and a black trench coat.
Cool.
Once Chris comes out, he immediately starts bawling.
Oh.
He says, you know what? I have nothing to live for anyway. My life's a mess. I failed high school. I have no motivation to finish it. I don't even have a job. I'm a fuck-up. It's just this depression. It's so crippling. I just want to die. My life is miserable. I want to be a cop. I wasn't going to do anything. I'm fat. I can't do anything.
Oh my God.
So there are very few cases in which people just immediately own up to it.
I hate to say this, and I feel like I've already said this quite a few times, but men will do anything except go to therapy.
Say it again.
Say it again. They will have sex with children, but they will not go to therapy.
Say it again. Yep.
Oh my God.
So interestingly, this last tape that I just mentioned of Vincent Ambrosio was not released until 2019.
What?
Because after Vincent talked about being suicidal in the past and being on a ton of mental health medications, the producers worried that he might kill himself if they released the footage right away.
Yeah.
So that leads us into perhaps the most interesting story in To Catch a Predator history, and maybe one of the final nails in the coffin for the original running of the TV show.
Shit.
So obviously, Chris Hansen and the members of Perverted Justice and the camera crews, they put themselves in a lot of danger doing this show.
Yeah.
Both to protect themselves and to seek further justice against these men, the stings eventually started including the police. So at the beginning, To Catch a Predator was doing, like I said, what Perverted Justice had done for a long time. They would just find these men, they would transmit their information and their photos to the world as a form of justice.
Right.
Rather than, like, formally involving the police and the legal system.
Interesting.
However, after only 2 airings of the show, police departments and local politicians got really excited about the opportunity to team up with To Catch a Predator, since they had to do very little work. Like, the police didn't really have to do anything, but they could claim that they were arresting all these men for being predators.
Oh, that makes sense.
So in almost every investigation except for those first 2, the police were always on the scene. Chris would interview the men at the counter. He would say, well, there's something I need to tell you. I'm Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC, and we're doing a story on men who try to meet children on the internet for sex. The men would then leave. They would either run away when the cameras came out, or they would just kind of, like, shyly, like, walk out with their tail between their legs. And once they were outside, they would be arrested. So there were only 2 instances in which violence was, like, a real threat to them before the police became involved. So David Kay, who was a middle-aged rabbi in Virginia, who was trying to meet a 13-year-old boy, saw the cameras, and he lunged at a cameraman, having be pushed away by a security guard.
Whew.
He left on his own, and since this was before the cops were involved, he was never arrested.
What? Even after he tried to assault somebody? What the fuck?
And me, a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah, what the fuck?
Like,
what the fuck?
I feel like one of these things is more intense than the other.
Yeah, well, they had video of him assaulting the guy,
Yeah.
so it's like, oh my god. Okay, that's neither here nor there.
And Dan Allen, who was a 49-year-old man in Riverside, California, who was trying to meet a 13-year-old girl, upon seeing the camera crew, he said, well, I'll shove that camera down your throat.
Whoa.
So other than these 2 instances, there was never any violence against Chris or the camera crews or anybody, and even in these 2 incidences, no one was actually hurt. But there was one instance, however, in which things took a bloody turn.
Oh no.
So in Murphy, Texas, a 56-year-old man named Louis Conrad sent penis photos and explicit messages to someone who he thought was a 13-year-old boy.
Not the penis photos.
I didn't want to write dick pic.
Well, it has kind of the same kind of penis photo, dick pic.
Yeah, it's like a syllable.
Yeah.
Dick pic.
Doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well.
It's a little more professional.
Of course. The genital images.
Pictures of his genitalia.
Yes, of course.
Louis Conrad, the 56-year-old in Murphy, Texas, was also the chief felony district attorney in his county.
Oh, no. You're kidding. And they got him on Dateline?
Yep. So Louis Conrad didn't come to the Sting House, but Perverted Justice and To Catch a Predator proved that it was him, provided the information to the police. On November 5th, 2006, the police received a warrant to enter Conrad's home.
They actually were going to arrest him?
They showed up with the SWAT team. So Perverted Justice, To Catch a Predator, the cameras, and the SWAT team show up to the district attorney's home. The SWAT team enters. Louis Conrad is standing at the top of a staircase holding a gun. He says, I'm not going to hurt anybody, and shoots himself. Dead.
No way.
District attorney. So he probably figured,
camera?
I'm a district attorney. I've killed all these I've arrested all these people. Mm-hmm. I can't go to jail.
No.
As a predator. No. As a gay predator.
Not the gay predator.
I can't go to jail. So he kills himself.
With the Dateline crew there.
Mm-hmm.
With the SWAT team.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god.
With Chris fucking Hansen on the scene.
Oh my god.
Yep. Following this incident in 2007, Conrad's sister filed a $100 million lawsuit against NBC Universal for the death of her brother.
Oh my god.
The suit was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. In an interview, Chris Hansen explained that insurance companies will cover settlements, but they won't cover if you go to court and you're ordered to pay something. So, like, let's say hypothetically NBC had taken this to court and had a trial. If they had lost and they had to pay his sister $100 million, the insurance wouldn't have covered it. But if they settled out of court and never took it to trial, the insurance would cover whatever that settlement amount was. So, needless to say, because she was planning on suing for $100 million and they settled it, she got several $1 million for the suicide of her predator brother.
I was gonna say, I don't feel like she should have gotten any money.
No.
Respectfully.
No.
Actually, no, disrespectfully.
No.
You should not be getting any money because your pedophile brother decided to kill himself.
Yeah.
Like
yeah. Like,
what?
maybe if he had kids, maybe his kids.
Sure, but
Because,
not her.
But not his fucking sister.
Yeah, like, what does she stand to gain?
And he didn't kill himself because, like, NBC did some smear campaign about his political activity.
Nope.
He killed himself because he was gonna rape a 13-year-old boy.
And they caught him.
And, like, if he wasn't district attorney, odds are he would have shown up to that house that
Absolutely.
day. And ruined a 13-year-old boy's life.
Absolutely.
So, like, I don't understand that.
And he would have gotten away with it, too, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh.
And if he wasn't district attorney, he wouldn't have killed him. Like, I just don't. I will never understand that.
Wow.
So that didn't directly end the show because they went on to do several more rounds of stings after this incident, but it definitely put a damper on things.
Yeah, I believe it.
Chris Hansen has claimed time and time again that this was not the reason the show was canceled, but all signs kind of point to it. The show was definitely becoming a huge liability for NBC, and despite its huge popularity, it was just getting too risky.
Damn.
So eventually the show was canceled. In 2020, Chris Hansen went on to do a YouTube show called Have a Seat with Chris Hansen.
Yes!
So it's essentially the same setup, except they would arrange the meetings in a motel room, and the police would arrest the guys as soon as they showed up, and then Chris would interview them. So
Smart.
versus like them showing up and Chris having a conversation with them and then them going outside and the police being there, it was like they showed up, they knocked on the door of the motel, the police opened, arrested them, sat them down, and then Chris came out.
Wow. Okay.
Which is objectively safer for
Yeah, I was
Chris.
going to say much safer.
And Chris was probably like, I've risked my life hundreds of times now. We can shake it up a little bit.
Yeah, I guess we can use police brutality for good.
Fine. So Have a Seat with Chris Hansen is still going on. The show, however, compared to Catch a Predator, has some, like, in my opinion, problems. For instance, in episode 3, and I'm really interested to hear your opinion on this. In episode 3 of Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, they caught an 18-year-old boy who was there to meet a 15-year-old girl. He did send her photos of his penis, which, because he's 18 and she was 15, is a federal crime. But I feel that they could be in high school together. Like, she would be a sophomore, he would be a senior. And in New York State, with the age of consent laws in New York, it wouldn't even be illegal for them to have sex. So I'm curious to hear your opinion on that, on him being arrested.
Arrested and put in jail?
Yes. And he's
a felon?
I don't know about a felon, but he's a registered sex offender.
I don't know. I mean, I never personally was, like, on board with the whole, like, seniors in high school going after the freshmen to begin with. I think morally and ethically, it's just not something that you should do. Whether or not it's illegal, I don't know.
Is it great?
No.
When I was 15, should I have been having sex with an 18-year-old? No. Would that have fucked me up? Probably. No, I didn't do that.
I was going to say...
No, I didn't do that.
Who?
I had a girlfriend for 4 years in high school. I didn't do that.
I was like, who the fuck was this 18-year-old?
No. Lauren's face when I said that. Should that be a thing? No. Do I think that the 18-year-old should be a registered sex offender for the rest of his life? I don't know. I'm going to say I think that's a gray area. And I'm going to say that on tape. And I'm more than open to having a conversation about that. That's not the hill I'm going to die on. But, like, I just don't know if I feel... I think they kind of jumped the shark a little bit with that one.
I feel like that's... And I hate to be, like, the whole states' rights thing. But I feel like that's a question that we would need to have, like, some lawyer answer for us.
I agree.
Because I do see where you're coming from in that, like, this kid is 18. But also, the hypothetical child is 15. And should a 15-year-old be having sex with an 18-year-old? Probably not.
No, and she would probably walk out of there with some, like, emotional trauma.
Yeah.
I just think when you look at the earlier episodes of the show, where it was intended to catch, like, 50-year-old men raping 12-year-olds.
Yes.
I think there's a big difference between that and two people who could feasibly be in high school together.
I agree. It's a very different level of severity.
Extremely. And I think in the earlier episodes of the show, they weren't even getting arrested versus this 18-year-old is now a sex criminal for life. I don't know. I think there's a difference there. So one of these guys in this new Hansen sit down with me thing, whatever it's called. I don't watch this new one. I don't like it. But
Take a Seat with Chris Hansen.
That. I don't like
Chris it. With Seat Hansen.
Take the seat with Chrissy. One of the guys tells Chris that he was on his way to Burger King and he just stopped by to meet the girl really quick on the way. And Chris, I will say, he's still got the zingers in him because he says, "Why didn't you just go to Burger King, get your son a burger, and go home? Now you're here telling me a whopper of a story."
Not the Whopper.
And these, I just want to say, are like totally unscripted. He's
off the cuff?
Yeah, he's good. He's witty. I just think that it's kind of gotten a little ridiculous. I don't think it conveys the same message that the show was intending on conveying when they started in 2004. And I think instead of sort of instead of the point being spreading awareness about these things happening online, make sure you're monitoring your kids, make sure you're having conversation with your kids. It's become sort of just like them capitalizing off of this whole situation. And I think that arresting the 18-year-old having sex with the 15-year-old is kind of like, it's endemic of them just capitalizing off of it versus spreading awareness of it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I see exactly what you mean, because instead of it being this like cultural phenomenon, kind of like a Me Too moment before that was even a thought in anyone's minds, bringing light to this like really dangerous subset of individuals on the internet. It's more so just like riding the coattails of the movement from beforehand. And you're right, it is absolutely indicative.
I agree. And I think it started out as a news segment, as spreading awareness, as outing these men who might be in your community.
Yeah.
And it's now become, this makes money, people enjoy this has fans. And admittedly, I am a fan. Like, I am a person who watches this. Never would I come in contact with these men, so it doesn't affect me, nor am I a parent. So like, it doesn't affect me, and I am a fan of it. But I just think it's very much moved away from the quote-unquote movement, like you said, that it once was. And then I think there's also a conversation to be had about, instead of outing these men in the original call-out culture justice that it once was, it is now involving the police, for better or for worse. It is involving the police. And a lot of these men, when they sit down, they say either, "I need help, I need counseling," or "I am getting help, I am getting counseling." Some of the men genuinely say that, whether or not that's the truth, whether or not that's just a way to get out of trouble, I don't know, truly. But a lot of the men say that they need help. Resources are never given to these men. Instead, they're put in jail.
Yeah, I have a problem with that.
And it's, do I think that they should be in jail? I don't know. Like, I am not a victim of sex crimes. I don't know. I probably shouldn't have much of a say in that. Do I think that they should get resources? Yes. And they are never given counseling. And there is never a conversation on the show about, like, if you or a loved one are having these thoughts, this is something that you can do. Because it's such a taboo. And I think in our culture, that is something that we can universally agree is fucking horrific and awful. And it's horrible that these men would even think about doing that. But I think that part of the conversation should not be educate your children about what to do online and what not to do online. Part of the conversation should be like, hey, if you're having these thoughts, go get help. Like, you shouldn't be doing this. Because, I don't know. I think there's just a huge social conversation to lightly have about that.
Lightly. Yeah, I see what you mean. But I am going to say I do think predators should be in jail.
Okay.
Should they also receive help while they're in jail? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that the entirety of the police system and the like school to prison pipeline and the lack of resources for mentally disturbed people and like just putting them away is not doing them any good. However, I don't think that we should allow men to be touching children.
No, and in no way am I saying that.
Yes,
no universe am I saying that.
Yeah.
What I mentioned to you earlier that I didn't fully get into because I wanted to get into the episode first.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to do like a serious in-depth study of the first few episodes in which they did not involve the police, and this was simply like a humiliation tactic. I want to look into whether or not those men redid this and were caught doing this again versus the men who were arrested and were put on sex offender registries if they did this again. Because there are a lot of men who were arrested, on the show and spent like 2 years in jail and then went on to get caught doing the same thing in the future.
Am I hearing a graduate thesis?
That's what I'm saying.
Casey, I think this is a graduate thesis.
Because I think like abolitionist opinions are really hard. It's really hard to work through those things. I sound like a crazy person sometimes when I talk about them, but I just think like it'd be really interesting if there was some sort of like data on whether or not the men who were just humiliated versus the men who were humiliated and put away for 2 years, whether or not one of those things made a difference more than the other one.
Effective.
Yes.
Ooh, yeah.
Or if either are effective. Like, I just think there's like a huge conversation to have here.
Show me the data.
And I think it's just really tough because obviously these men are fucked and it's fucked and they were going to ruin someone's life.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases outside of the show, kids died.
Yeah.
Like, it's fucked.
Yep.
I just think like, in order to have the best outcome, I think we just need to have a really serious conversation about what works and what doesn't work.
And there needs to be more discussions with, like, young boys and just men in general about, like, I think that, you know what, there is a lot of conversation already about, like, male sexuality and the internet and pornography and shit like that. But I think there should also be, like, more nuanced discussions about, like, what to do if you realize you're kind of slipping into that rabbit hole. Because I think one of the more interesting parts of the internet, and we kind of talked about this on the previous episode where it's like you can be quietly obsessed with something, is that this has given men, like, an echo chamber within which they can slide down a pipeline.
Yeah.
So, like, you say, for example, you start off liking, like, I don't know, porn where the person on the receiving end is getting slapped around. Who's to say that, if you're extremely depressed and extremely isolated and cut off from other people, that's not slowly going to evolve into, like, a way more violent, drastic form of pornography to the point where you have conditioned yourself to only